Guyana has the highest suicide rate in the world. It is a country in South America with a multi-ethnic population. Ironically, it's a very wealthy country in terms of natural resources, with less than 1 million people. Why is it that Guyana has the highest suicide rate? Why the people of that country do not have hope? Stay tuned. Carib Nation is up next. Guyana, according to the World Health Organization, has the highest suicide rate in the world. One wonders why a country that is so well endowed with resources, with less than 1 million people on 83,000 square miles, has such a serious problem. Why this young nation state of about 52 years old, the people do not have hope. This problem about suicide is affecting all ethnic groups in Guyana, in the rural areas, in the urban areas, the young people and the old people. It has to do with domestic violence, it has to do with violence against children, and many other factors, unemployment and so forth. Today in our studio, Carib Nation has two guests, Dr. Cislina Ledbetter, a professor at the University of the District of Columbia, who teaches psychology. And we also have with us Dr. Nayana Rasayon, who is a neuroscientist, who also teaches at the University of the District of Columbia. We have invited these two guests as professionals who could give us some kind of understanding about this serious human problem that faces not only Guyana, but America and countries around the world. Thank you for being on our program today. Dr. Cislina Ledbetter,
Yes.
can you tell us a bit about yourself and how would you begin this conversation with
Yeah.
us about suicide?
Well, first, I want to thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really thrilled to be here to talk about such an important issue. My background is social psychology, so I can talk to you a little bit about some of the social determinants around suicide. But I'm particularly interested because I'm also part Jamaican. And I know that these countries in the Caribbean are plagued with suicide. And suicide is one of those really social maladies that it's really insular, so the world doesn't necessarily have to get involved in suicide because suicide is one of those things where you handle it within country, and unlike viruses like HIV that could potentially affect the world, the rest of the world can just allow Guyanese and Jamaicans and other Caribbean poor countries to die. And so I'm so glad that we're talking about something really important today because the way you set it up was perfectly. And that is that there are social determinants. It's not any one thing, it's a host of things. So I'm looking forward to talking more about that.
And Dr. Rason, can you tell us a bit about yourself and how do you discuss this issue from where you are from your intellectual discipline, your profession?
Well, first of all, I'm honored that you asked me to actually participate in this subject matter. My background is in behavioral neuroscience and in clinical psychology, and I've had a range of contact with people that are at risk for suicide, particularly African American males. And as a result of my experience with them, we can generalize throughout the world. That typically when you find people vulnerable at risk for suicide, sometimes alcoholism is a factor. There's a lack of stability in nurturing relationships. There is an incredible sense of feeling alienated from the society. And oftentimes they don't have any kind of real meaningful spiritual anchoring / religious core for them to find a sense of value in their lives. And beneath all of that is a systematic programming in any number of environments, except the military in particular, where people feel that they've been so marginalized they don't have anyone to turn to. And as a result of that, their coping skills deteriorate. And they actually move into a mindset of feeling that they're helpless. So if you're feeling helpless, then what can you do for your vessel to take care of it? Typically, people are inclined to want to give it up.
Well, you know, I was doing some research on Guyana, and I saw a young lady who is now an artist. She was a beauty queen and she sings. And she has decided to take up the cause of suicide in Guyana. But what she said, that when she was 15 years old, she attempted. And she says, because she had no one to speak to. Dr. Ledbetter, tell us, what does that really mean?
Well, I think that when you think about Guyana, a country with less than 1 million people, right? You talked about that. They have reportedly 5 psychologists in the entire country.
That's a fact.
3 psychiatrists in the country, and 54% living below the poverty line. You need resources. You need people to talk to, and it's not intuitive to be able to find people that can support you, that can give you the resources that you need in order to understand how to deal with mental health, which is a stigma all over the world. And I think in Guyana, it just has this history of suicidality that it almost resonates to me as like this perfect storm. A lot of poverty, a lot of resources, but not the ability to really make use of those resources for whatever reasons, and that's something that would for another time. But that you've got people who are, I think, really struggling with hope. And don't have the resources to cope with their lives. They're just really struggling with day to day.
Dr. Rassan, your experience in America, how do you address this in terms of this aspect of hope?
Well, you see, when you start talking about suicide, for example, if you were to talk about the kinds of things that would impact Caucasian males to make them more inclined to commit suicide, there would be a slightly different dynamic in terms of what's valued, all right?
That's interesting.
And that may be directly related to their income stability per se, period, all right? Their sense of worth. Conversely, with brown and black people, their relationships are critical. And oftentimes your relationships are mediated by your resource base, and your resource base will give you the kind of resources to have a meaningful, viable relationship. For example, family. An African-American male or a brown male, Latino male, Chicano male, if you're not able to do things to support your family, then you feel less than a man. You feel less than a viable human being. So as a result, oftentimes, hand in hand, people may be inclined to drink alcohol. There may be even promiscuity, you know, because people that are in pain, they want pleasure. So when they feel alienated, they try and isolate the pain by over-engaging in things that create the illusion that the pain will go away. And for brown and black people, oftentimes that may translate into alcoholism, particularly if they're not anchored in any particular type of religious core. Now, in terms of Guyana, without knowing the particulars of the dynamics, like you said, the country has a lot of resources, but how are those resources distributed among the people? Why do you have that kind of unemployment? And then when you add on top of unemployment, you have underemployment. You have people with the classic stereotypes on the islands. I'm sure you heard it, like how many jobs do you have? 3, 4, 5, 6, I have 17, I have all these jobs. But those jobs are not jobs because you necessarily want them. You need those jobs to sustain your family.
Dr. Ledbetter, this thing of pain, across the board, in Guyana and also, I assume, all across the world, the LGBTQ community has specific issues. The transgender people have specific issues. Women have gender issues. The youth, and so forth.
Right.
Can you talk a bit about this across the various categories, as Dr. Rassan was trying to point out that, you know, that even though we have different multiculturalism, that also is an important factor. The way we probably look at it, the way we treat it, and the way we approach.
So you started talking about pain, and I can tell you that pain is something that is becoming, the way we treat pain is becoming epidemic. So we know that in the US, we have 5% of the population but we consume 90% of the opioids, right? So pain, however, we know is not, we're not in any more pain than any other country, but we consume more of the opioids. So what I know about pain is that there are social determinants in Guyana that clearly create pain, i.e. the broken relationships that Dr. Rasayan was talking about. However, I think that there is, despite the fact that they talk about stigma, I think there's more stigma around mental health services, which are all in the capital area and not in the rural areas in Guyana. I think there's more stigma around mental health services.
I just want to pin a point here. In Guyana, when I was growing up, they referred to the mental institution, and my uncle, Dr. Drupal, was the head of it as a madhouse.
Right, right. And they still do in some areas. They absolutely still do. And so when you start talking about, you know, the breakdown of how these breakdowns of relationships are causing pain in Guyana, I don't necessarily think that it's just about the pain. I think it's about the mental health stigma and about how suicide is less stigmatized than mental health. So I was reading where families have lost 5 and 6 and 7 people in one family because they drink the pesticide. And so there's the pesticide for the rice farms. And so there's lots.
Yeah, in the rural areas of Guyana where the Indians live. And a lot of people believe all Indians are rich in Guyana. It's not true. The poorest people in Guyana, the people in the rural areas, and the interior, the Amerindians live. The rural area, predominantly Indian. They have Afro-Guyanese too, but predominantly Indian. They're the poorest, but people don't say that. And 80% of the suicide rate in Guyana is among the Indians.
That's right. That's right.
And so you are right. You are right about this.
Yeah. And so, and as you talk about the poor Indians and the farmers, there are also subcultures. You mentioned the LGBTQ. Well, we know here that they're twice as likely to commit suicide and complete.
Well, you know, in Jamaica, they're very hostile.
Yes,
towards the LGBTQ community.
That's right. That's right.
How this kind of hostility contributes to that kind of problem?
Well, I think that anytime that you are
it's pain and isolation.
It is pain and isolation, and anytime you're in a community that's targeted, where you feel that you have to, you know, your day-to-day existence is a struggle. You're always negotiating whether you should be out and what out means. Just your very existence is a topic for conversation. I think that it creates some dissonance and creates some emotional turmoil and struggle. And unfortunately, far too many people feel that leaving, taking their own lives, is a better option than staying and subjecting themselves to the abuse and the ridicule, because people can be so mean, and that really starts really young.
People can be mean.
People can be mean.
Like bullying.
Bullying.
Oh, yes, I read of a case this morning where a young Amerindian Guyanese boy, his parents abandoned him and left him at a school.
Yeah.
And he was trying to survive, and he found it very difficult. And he was being bullied.
Yeah.
And they found him hanging himself in the restroom.
Wow.
So you are right that this loneliness. But Dr. Rasan, coming back to this issue of the brain, and you deal with the brains. What is it about the brains that we have to address to focus and to deal with the problem of suicide?
Well, you know, for example, the youngster that you just made reference to, you said his parents abandoned him.
Virtually. They broke up and then...
Okay, but see, they broke up and they abandoned him because they either had a debate about who would have enough resources to take care of him, or I didn't really want to be pregnant with him when I got pregnant with him, and you were not being responsible to be a father, i.e. unemployment. But in specific regard to the brain, if you hug someone and you like them, and they like you, you feel better, all right? Your body releases a certain class of chemicals. They're all in the endorphin family, all right? And if someone comes around you that you really dislike, you get anxiety. So your body is going to produce a little bit more adrenaline, norepinephrine in your brain, which is like, do I engage this person in some confrontation, or do I move away from them? But if you're comfortable with them and you really like them, then you feel better, i.e. serotonin, like you're listening to good music. Now, the kid that you just made reference to that you said hung himself, I mean, what are you to do? You're a kid, you're isolated, other kids are probably teasing him. He probably didn't have a proper hygiene because he didn't have access to what he needed. He probably didn't have proper clothing. That alone translates into you feeling more alienated. You don't have anyone to talk to. you probably don't present yourself in a manner where other people want to be around you, because when you're disheveled and you're unkempt and you're not clean, then people think that you have diseases, all right? And so what that does to you, it makes you depressed. And the perfect outlet for a person that's clinically depressed, he or she perceives the perfect outlet is, I don't want to feel pain anymore. What's the best way to not feel pain?
What do you mean by clinical depression?
When that's clinical depression, it's when an individual, people in general say someone has the blues, right? Clinical depression is just sitting around, you don't want to get up, you don't want to go anywhere, your hygiene is deteriorating, you don't feel like eating, you're not really cleaning yourself, you have a don't care attitude, and it goes on for weeks and weeks. That's clinical depression, all right? But there's a variant of a clinical depression that could be bipolar. You could be hyper as hell, all over the place, doing everything. Typically, oftentimes, when men get depressed, men oftentimes can become more active if they're not drinking. They may become promiscuous, they may drive their cars fast, they may have confrontations with people because they present themselves differently. But back to that youngster that you mentioned that committed suicide. You see, to me, that's what I would call a coercive suicide. There are suicides where individuals are just isolated from everybody and they just feel alone. But when society does not put resources in place, as Dr. Ledbetter mentioned to you about mental health facilities, it's a stigma. Your parents, your siblings, people that you think love you, if you present a mental health condition, people are ashamed of you, i.e. the stigma. If you have someone, let's say you're married to someone and they're a little spacey. So what do? It's like, you don't want to go anywhere with them because they embarrass you. And you don't want to engage them in a meaningful conversation because their conversations are often inappropriate. You follow me? So then they basically back away from people and they become more alienated. And when you become more alienated, guess what the brain has the ability to do? The brain has the ability to do several things. It can sedate you by making you chill and lay back, or if it really becomes pathological, you can create your own people inside your head because you're not interacting with anyone else. Add to that alcoholism or substance, all right? Now, a lot of these people in the suburbs, I'll call them my vanilla brothers and sisters that are on opioid addictions. 40 years ago, you were just a junkie. You were a criminal. But when vanilla brothers and sisters start expiring from opioid addiction, we came up with Narcan, and now all of a sudden we can give you a quick, bring you back to life up your nose to bring you back to breathing again. When brown and black people were like OD, they were junkies, they lived a hard life, they were on the street. So Europeans have this incredible ability to rename the game when certain things happen to their people. And I don't want to start talking about people in the military because those brothers and sisters are just completely abandoned when they come back home.
I'd like to come
They've
back.
been deployed so many times.
I'd like to come back.
They have so-called post-traumatic stress disorder.
I'd
You
like
come back home,
Yeah.
and the people that you've been fighting abroad for, being patriotic, they're looking at you like you don't have the right kind of interpersonal skills.
I'd like to come back to that before the program is over. But Dr. Ledbetter, and to both of you, I want to ask this question. We, from countries like the Caribbean, we are a people that went through conquest, slavery, and indentureship. One would have thought that the leaderships that grew out of these societies would have had sufficient empathy and care that they would approach these problems very differently, as you are mentioning, from like when the British colonizer was there. What is it about us in these countries, the way we deal with mental health and suicide, that we don't have a more humanistic approach? What happened to us? The leadership across these societies, what happened?
I mean, that's a huge question. And
I know
it's a huge question, and I don't know if I have the answer to what happened to us, but I do know that these black countries are really suffering from just abysmal leadership. They're suffering from corruption. They are suffering from greed. As you said, it's not the lack of resources, it's the lack of distribution of resources in a fair and equitable way. And it is rampant. And I don't necessarily believe that it's just about people of color across the globe, but I think that capitalism and greed is really the order of the day. And I think it rules our world. We look at these societies, including the United States, that are really violent, and our history is violent. And so that's how we've been begotten out of violence. And so I think that particularly when it comes down to being compassionate for people who are committing suicide and noticing when people like the young man that you talked about are marching down these paths of isolation and desolation, the community's responsibility is to jump in and take charge. because we can't always rely on leaders to be the voice of reason. It is the responsibility of the extended families. It is the responsibility of the community to notice.
I just want to pin a point here, and that is one of the problems in Guyana and countries like the Caribbean is that we have had a negative impact or we have created dysfunctional families because of migration, because we have very high rates of migration. Like in the case of Guyana, 80% or so of the people that graduate from the university leaves. People have to migrate in order to earn. That's why we send remittances home. So who becomes the head of the family when the mother has to go, or the father has to go, or the big brother has to go, or the big sister has to go?
You know, some things we have to keep in perspective. For example, the news in America amplified over and over again after we had this incredible hurricane that devastated the diaspora, the Caribbean islands. But what you heard religiously in the news was, what are we going to do about Cuba and Puerto Rico? You didn't hear anything about St. Thomas. You didn't hear anything about how the Virgin Islands were devastated. Because you have to be mindful that you have a lot of people that live there that look like this sister that look like you. You have brown people here. And we have to be mindful of the fact that brown and black people are marginalized throughout the world. People come into those environments, extract those resources. People go down to the islands, they go down to have fun, have jerk chicken, listen to people play the drums, the pans, and they go to the beaches and the oceans, they have fun. But they leave those people there that are hustling to try and stay alive, and they get exploited by this commercial mentality of Western exploitation. And back to those individuals not doing things for their family, they lose their sense of identity. In order for you to have a viable and meaningful income, you're not able to take that kind of education and go in that environment and be productive. You do, unfortunately, have to go somewhere else, unless you can hang up your own shingle and start making money in that environment. But those people are not going to pay you money to sit down and talk to you $85 to $125 because you're a clinician. So you have to go where you can go and get paid, otherwise your degree is for naught. So those individuals, they lose their sense of identity. And when you lose your sense of identity, you become assimilated into a culture that by its very nature is designed to colonize your mentality, and you're walking around amplifying everything that you were told not to believe in as a child, and then you realize when you became an adult, everything that you were told to believe in as a child will not put food on the table and keep food in the refrigerator and allow you to have decent transportation.
But I also think, I think that, you know, and I absolutely agree with everything that you've said, but I think that you do have to come back home. I think you do have to have people that leave communities like Guyana, like Jamaica, and come back home. Go out to the States, go to England, go wherever you will need to go to get your university degrees, and then come back home. And then if you don't come back home, like I have friends who have graduated with their from Jamaica, and they go back and they do dental clinics, or they go back and they do mental health clinics. So if you can't go back and leave, go back and provide some resources, provide some stability to the community that gave you what is to come back and provide
well, there has
resources.
been some of this, and this brings me to another issue. It seems to me that at the level of governments, there is a lot of insensibilities and lack of prioritizing resources to address this issue. When I look at what's happening in the Caribbean, Guyana, and even to a great extent here in America, you find that increasingly it's civil society organizations playing a role. Like leadership is coming independent of government and the private sector. What is your opinion about that?
No, I think that that's absolutely what needs to happen. I think that's grassroots. I think that's the community. And I think that in order to save ourselves, you're going to have to do what you need to do as a community, and not always look to government and upper leadership in order to write the prescription of what to do in order to get better. I know here in the U.S., and this is a tool that that anyone can use, there is a program called Mental Health First Aid, and it is targeted for people who have suicidality or who you may think are prone to suicide. And I think before I talk about that, Dr. Rassian was talking about changes in behavior. It's not always going down in behavior and showing signs of depression, but that bipolar cycle, whatever is opposite of what you typically are, your change in behavior can signal that there's a problem going on inside. So if you're typically that person who's calm and you kind of chill and things are cool with you, and then all of a sudden you see this person and they've got all of this energy and they're doing, you know, they're acting completely out of character or what you know their character can be, to be, that can absolutely be a warning sign that something is going on. And so I just want to leave those 5 tips with mental health first aid.
Okay.
And it's called algae. When you see someone or know of someone who you believe is struggling and perhaps going through suicidal ideation, you assess, that's the A. You give information, any information that you can have. I know that Guyana has a new hotline, a new suicide hotline. So you give information. You listen attentively. That's a really tough thing to do. It's easy to say, but it's really tough to listen without judgment. And then the E is for encourage. You encourage professional help. If you can't get to professional help, you encourage self-help tools. And you try to de-escalate and help people to understand that suicide does not have to be the option that they take. That if they live another day, they can, you know, they have another opportunity to get it right, despite their belief that they're hopeless.
Dr. Hassan, we give you the last brief comment on this issue of suicide.
I think that she just summed it up. You know, if you don't give people a sense of power, then people feel that they are useless. So you have to empower people, and the way to empower people is to at least be respectful enough of their culture, to acknowledge their culture as you try to engage them in a sense of identity. You are not able to come in and help people unless you acknowledge where they are. You're not able to come in and say you need to change the way you're thinking. You need to join in and find out what's troubling them and be mindful of their culture as you communicate with them. It's called cultural literacy. So you have to be mindful of that as you engage people.
Well, Carib Nation will continue to monitor this issue in Guyana, in the Caribbean, and around the world. It is very evident that this is a very complex but a very serious issue. It has historical dimensions, social dimensions, economic dimensions, cultural dimensions, even ideological dimensions. We have to continue, however, to understand that each one of us as an individual, in whatever sphere of activity we are in, for example, I am a teacher, that one has to use our office and our sensibilities and sensitivities to take each person that we deal with a lot of care. And we have to care for each other. Dr. Ledbetter said the community has to play a role. You know, in the end, it's only the people can save the people. We cannot depend on corrupt government leaders or insensitive government leaders and leadership that falls down at various levels. Only the people can save the people. Until next time, I'm Paul New Tennessee for Carib Nation.